Darius Cole was 38 years old, a union foreman who built things with his hands and kept his word like it was the only currency that mattered. He had spent 6 months in prison for a crime he did not commit, framed by a man he trusted on a job site he ran. 6 months. And every single day he held on to one thing: the woman waiting for him at home, the house he had gutted and rewired himself, the life he had built from nothing. When his conviction was finally overturned, he walked out of Holman Correctional with a paper bag and one destination. He used his own key. He walked into his own kitchen, and what he saw when his wife turned around did not just break something inside him. It answered every question he had been too loyal to ask. She was 3 months pregnant. Darius had been gone 6. He stood there, completely still, and began to understand exactly how long he had been a fool. What he uncovered next would change everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The doors of Holman Correctional opened at 7:42 in the morning. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a guard who didn't make eye contact, a paper bag pressed into Darius Cole's hands, and a gust of February air that hit him in the face like a cold, flat palm. He stood on the concrete for a moment, just stood there. Let his lungs figure out what free air felt like again. His boots were the same ones he'd worn going in. His jacket still fit. 6 months had not taken much from him physically. He had made sure of that. Push-ups in a 6x9 cell. Pull-ups on the door frame. Sleep when sleep was possible. Read when it wasn't. He had refused, quietly and completely, to come apart in there. Walter Gaines was leaning against a silver Camry at the far end of the lot, hands in his coat pockets, breath rising in small clouds. 55 years old, trim, patient. The kind of man who could wait without fidgeting. He and Darius had known each other long enough that no words were needed for the first 30 seconds. Walter just opened the passenger door. Darius got in. They drove in silence for a while. The highway unfolded ahead of them, gray and familiar. Darius watched the billboards pass, gas stations, fast food signs, a church marquee with a Bible verse he read twice before it was gone. "You look good," Walter said finally. "I'm all right." Darius kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Tell me about the case." Walter had built it piece by piece over 6 months. Marcus Freely, a subcontractor Darius had caught falsifying labor hours on a commercial job in Bessemer, had needed someone to carry the weight when $40,000 in copper wire walked off that same job site. He'd chosen Darius, doctored 2 purchase invoices, created a gap in the site's surveillance log that pointed directly at the foreman's access window. Then he'd stood in front of a jury and described, in steady and convincing detail, how Darius Cole had orchestrated the whole thing. A jury had believed him. Walter had not. The invoices used a font that didn't exist until 8 months after the dates printed on them, Walter said. That's what broke it open. One of those details nobody checks until somebody does. Darius nodded slowly. He had already heard all of this. Walter had filed the motion, kept him informed, read him the ruling over the phone in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner. But hearing it again in open air, in a moving car, with the city appearing on the horizon, made it feel like something he could actually hold. "And the hearing?" Darius asked. Walter's hands shifted on the wheel. "Just slightly. Yvette didn't come," he said. He kept his voice level. "She wasn't there." Darius didn't say anything. He turned that fact over the way he turned a bad connection over in his hand on a job site. Slowly, checking every angle, looking for what it actually meant before deciding what to do with it. Her letters had slowed down around month 3. By month 5, they had stopped. He had told himself she was holding things together at home. Told himself distance was hard for people who weren't built for it. He had extended to her every good faith available to him because that was what he did. He filed the absence away. "All right," he said. Walter glanced at him once, then looked back at the road. The house was on a quiet street in Irondale, a brick ranch house with a covered porch and a dogwood tree in the front yard that was just starting to bud. Darius had bought it 9 years ago when it was a wreck. Rotted subflooring, aluminum wiring that was a fire waiting to happen. A kitchen that hadn't been touched since 1987. He had gutted it room by room on weekends and evenings over 2 years. Laid the floors himself. Rewired every circuit in the house to code he could have recited in his sleep. He knew every inch of it. It was his in a way that went past the deed. Yvette's car was in the driveway. The lights inside were on, warm and gold through the front windows. Darius used his key. The door swung open on a house that smelled different, subtly. A different candle, maybe, or a different soap, but different. He noticed it, the way he noticed things. He heard her before he saw her. Laughter coming from the kitchen. Easy, unguarded laughter. The kind a person produces when they believe they are completely alone. He walked down the short hallway and turned into the kitchen doorway. Yvette was standing at the counter with her back to him, phone pressed to her ear, one hand gesturing as she talked. She was wearing a loose blouse he didn't recognize. She turned. The laughter stopped. Her face changed, but not the way a face changes with surprise. There was no sharp intake of breath, no hand flying to her chest. What moved across her features was slower than that. Quieter, like a door being closed and locked from the inside. Her eyes were steady and already working. And then Darius saw it. The blouse wasn't unfamiliar because it was new. It was unfamiliar because it was cut to accommodate what was underneath it. She was pregnant. Visibly, unmistakably. Darius stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, paper bag in hand, and did not move. Darius set the paper bag on the counter. He didn't throw it, didn't drop it. He set it down with the same deliberate care he used for everything. Measured, controlled, like a man placing a tool he intends to pick up again. Then he pulled out a chair and sat at his own kitchen table. Yvette said something quick and quiet into the phone. "I'll call you back." She lowered it to the counter and stood there for a moment with her hand still resting on it, like she needed the contact, like she was steadying herself. Then she turned to face him fully. The math had already done itself in his head, clean and merciless as a blueprint. 6 months. He had been gone 6 months. She was showing, not barely, not if you knew to look, visibly. 3 months, maybe a little more, which meant this had happened while he was already inside. Not before. Not in some gray area of timing that a man could talk himself into or out of. While he was in a 6x9 cell writing her letters, she stopped answering. He kept his face still. He folded his hands on the table and waited. She started talking before he could say a word. "I was going to tell you." Her voice was calm, measured. The words came out in a rhythm that felt slightly too smooth, like something practiced in front of a mirror. "I wanted to do it in person. I wasn't going to put something like this in a letter, Darius. I couldn't do that to you." He said nothing. Things were so hard. She moved slightly, shifted her weight. Being here alone, managing everything, not knowing what was happening week to week, I wasn't okay. I want you to understand that. I really wasn't okay. He watched her face. She held eye contact, but not naturally. She held it the way someone holds it when they've decided that looking away would cost them something. This wasn't planned. I need you to know that. This wasn't something I set out for. It just... She paused. Let the sentence hang. It happened. And I'm sorry you're having to find out this way. I'm sorry this is hard for you right now. There it was. Sorry you're having to find out this way. Sorry this is hard for you. Not, I'm sorry. Not two plain, direct words that a person says, when they understand what they have done. She had maneuvered around the center of the thing with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the exact boundary of what she was willing to admit. He caught it the way he caught a wiring error, not with anger, but with the quiet, certain recognition of a man who knows what a correct connection is supposed to look like. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Who? The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. He counted them without meaning to. 2 seconds of something moving behind her eyes. Not panic, not guilt, calculation. It doesn't matter who, she said. Her voice didn't waver. That was the part that struck him. Not the answer, but how ready she was with it. She'd had that one prepared too. All of it. The soft opening, the "I wanted to tell you in person," the careful non-apology, the answer to the question she knew was coming. She had sat somewhere, in this house or somewhere else, and she had rehearsed this moment like a woman preparing for a negotiation she intended to walk out of ahead. Darius nodded once, slow. He stood up. He picked up the paper bag from the counter. "I'm going to Aunt Celestine's," he said. Something shifted in her face. The composure cracked. Just at the edge, just barely. "Darius," her voice had a different quality now. "We need to talk about this." "We will," he said. He walked out of his own kitchen, down his own hallway, and out the front door he had hung himself on a cold Saturday 8 years ago. Walter was still in the car, parked at the curb. He hadn't left. Of course he hadn't left. Darius got in. He put the paper bag between his feet. Walter didn't ask. He pulled away from the curb and drove, and the house shrank in the passenger mirror until it didn't. They were 2 miles out when Walter spoke. "There's something else." He kept his eyes on the road. "I didn't want to tell you before you went inside. Figured you had enough walking in the door." Darius waited. "While you were incarcerated, Yvette refinanced the house." Walter's voice was steady and careful, the voice of a man who understood the weight of what he was delivering. "She pulled $60,000 in equity. Used the power of attorney you signed before the arrest, the one Darius had signed for routine bills, for the mortgage payment, the utilities, the ordinary maintenance of a life that was supposed to keep running while he dealt with the legal system. "The money is gone," Walter said. "I've been trying to trace it. So far, it's gone." Darius stared out the passenger window. The city moved past him. A gas station, a row of bare winter trees, a school with a marquee sign out front. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Where did the money go?" Walter's hands stayed steady on the wheel. "That's what we're going to find out." Celestine opened the door before he could knock. She must have heard the car. Or maybe she had just been watching for it, standing somewhere near the window the way she had probably been doing since Walter called her. She was a small woman, compact and straight-backed, with silver locks pinned up and reading glasses pushed to the top of her head like she had been interrupted mid-sentence by something that mattered more than whatever she'd been reading. She looked at his face. She didn't say, "Oh, baby," or "I'm so sorry," or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to do. She just opened her arms. The hug lasted 30 seconds. He counted without meaning to. She held on with both arms, firm and sure, the way a person holds something they are not prepared to lose. When she let go, she stepped back and looked at him again. "Come sit down," she said. "I've been waiting for you." Her house was small and immaculate. Plants on every windowsill, some flowering, some not. All of them alive and tended. Folders on the bookshelf, organized by color. A smell like coffee and cedar, and something faintly sweet from whatever she had been cooking earlier. She brought 2 mugs to the kitchen table without asking how he took his. She already knew. She sat across from him and folded her hands and looked at him the way she had always looked at him when she was about to say something he needed to hear, whether he was ready or not. "I'm going to tell you what I saw," she said. "And then I'm going to show you what I kept. And I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything." He nodded. She started 8 weeks back from his arrest. A Tuesday evening in late October. She had made a pot of chicken and dumplings, the heavy, thick kind he had liked since he was 9 years old, and driven over to drop it off, the way she had been doing every week or so since he went inside. She hadn't called ahead. She had never needed to before. There was a car in the driveway. "A Mercedes," she said. "Dark blue. Newer model. I didn't recognize it." She said it evenly, without drama. Yvette's light was on in the back of the house. The living room was lit up. She paused. "I sat in my car for a minute. Then I put my car in reverse, and I went home." Darius held his mug with both hands and said nothing. "I took the plate number before I left," she said. "Wrote it on a receipt from my purse." She got up from the table. She came back with a composition notebook. Black cover, spiral bound, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for $2. She set it in front of him. He opened it. The first entry was dated. Neat handwriting, the careful print of a woman who had spent 30 years preparing documents that needed to be legible in a courtroom. Date, time, location, description, license plate. Below it, a small photograph, printed on regular paper. The blue Mercedes in his driveway, the angle from the street, the plate clearly visible. He turned the page. There were more. Not every week, but regular enough to show a pattern. Different times of day. Twice on a Saturday. The Mercedes, present. Then a photograph of the man himself. She had caught him coming out the front door on a Thursday afternoon, turning to say something back into the house. He was tall, well-dressed even in casual clothes, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never felt like he didn't belong somewhere. "Brandon Holt," Celestine said. "Real estate developer, based downtown." She turned to a page near the back and tapped it with one finger. "Yvette did event work for 2 of his project launches. Before your arrest." That's how they knew each other. Darius looked at the photograph. He didn't know the face. He vaguely remembered Yvette mentioning a development client sometime the previous spring. A big account, good money, the kind of client she had been working toward. He had been proud of her for landing it. He turned that over once, quietly, and set it down somewhere he wasn't going to look at it again right now. Celestine reached to the other side of the table and slid a printed page toward him. A business registration document, public record, state filing. The kind of document a retired paralegal knew exactly how to find and exactly what it meant. Yvette's LLC. Yvette Cole Events, LLC. He recognized the name. He had helped her choose it. He had written the first check that covered her filing fees and her first 6 months of business expenses. He had worked a double shift on a Saturday to cover the deposit on her first office space, a small room in a shared building downtown that she had decorated herself and photographed for her website. The document had been updated 4 months ago. New filing, new structure, listed as co-owner, Brandon Holt Developments, LLC. The room was very quiet. Darius read the document once, then he folded it in half and in half again, and he put it in the front pocket of his jacket. "What do you want to do?" Celestine asked. He looked up at her. "I want to understand the full picture," he said, "before I move a single inch." She made up the guest room with fresh sheets, left a glass of water on the nightstand without being asked. He lay on top of the covers in the dark, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet around him. He could hear the heat clicking through the vents. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the wall. And then it was gone. He thought about the business registration. He thought about the notebook and its careful columns of dates and times. He thought about $60,000 moving through a power of attorney like water through a pipe he hadn't known was open. He thought about Brandon Holt walking out of his front door, comfortable, unhurried, a man with no reason to look over his shoulder. Across town, Darius understood. Yvette was in the house he had built. Brandon Holt was wherever Brandon Holt slept, easy and unbothered. Neither of them was worried. That, Darius decided, was exactly where he needed them. The coffee was already brewing when Darius came down the next morning. Celestine was at the counter, her back to him, slicing a piece of bread from a loaf she had made herself. She didn't turn around, but she said, "Walter called 20 minutes ago. Said to call him back when you were up." Darius pulled out a chair and sat. He had slept, which surprised him. Not well, but enough. He dialed Walter. Walter picked up on the second ring. "You eat anything yet?" "Just sat down." "Eat first," Walter said. "Then listen." Celestine set a plate in front of him. Darius ate a few bites of the bread. Then he said, "I'm listening." Walter had been moving since before sunrise. That was his way, quiet and early, building while everyone else was still asleep. He had already pulled the mortgage records, the refinancing instrument, and the original power of attorney Darius had signed before his arrest. He had read all 3 documents the way attorneys read things, which meant he had read them looking for the exact place where something broke. He found it fast. "The power of attorney you signed was limited," Walter said. "Routine household expenses, utilities, insurance, the usual. It was never intended to authorize a major asset transaction." He paused just long enough for Darius to follow the line. Accessing $60,000 in home equity falls well outside that scope. That is almost certainly civil fraud. Darius looked at the grain of Celestine's kitchen table. He traced a line in it with his thumbnail without pressing down. "I filed this morning," Walter said. "Quietly. Nothing public yet. I want them to have no idea it's in the record before we're ready." "Good," Darius said. "There's more." Walter's voice stayed level, the way it always did when the information was heavy. "I also filed a separate action against the subcontractor. Wrongful termination, professional defamation." Darius was still. "The conviction being vacated, that's the criminal side, and that's done," Walter said. "But the damage to your career is its own injury. Your foreman position, gone. Union benefits, suspended. 6 months of income, 6 months of pension contributions. All of that is compensable separately. And I intend to recover every dollar of it." Celestine moved quietly behind him, rinsing something in the sink. The coffee maker clicked off. "Now," Walter said, and his tone shifted slightly, still measured, but with something underneath it. Brandon Holt. He had pulled everything public on the man. Business filings, property records, litigation history. What he found was a particular kind of picture, the kind that looked impressive from a distance and showed its cracks up close. 2 liens on development properties, not small ones. A commercial project in Birmingham, a mixed-use build he had been promoting for over a year, that was currently over budget by a margin that would make any serious lender uneasy, and behind schedule by months that were beginning to matter. The financing structure was thin. The project needed a capital infusion to stay viable, and it needed one soon. "He looks successful," Walter said. "He is not stable." Darius absorbed this, the way he absorbed a blueprint, not just reading what was there, but understanding what it meant for everything connected to it. A man in that position needed money. Needed it in a way that made him willing to accept it from wherever it could come. $60,000, for instance, moving quietly through an LLC account into an operating fund. He didn't say any of that out loud. Walter already knew. "I'll be in touch," Walter said. "Don't do anything yet." "I know," Darius said. He hung up and ate the rest of his bread. Yvette called at 11:30. He let it go to voicemail. Listened to it afterward in the guest room with the door closed. Her voice was measured, almost gentle. The tone of a woman making a reasonable effort under difficult circumstances. She hoped he was doing okay. She understood he needed space. She just wanted him to know she was there when he was ready to have a real conversation. He listened to it once, set his phone face down on the bed. She called again at 3:15. The second voicemail was different. Same controlled voice, but something had tightened underneath it. She mentioned that there were legal matters that required both of their attention, that his silence wasn't just hard on her, it was irresponsible, given everything that needed to be addressed, that she hoped he wasn't letting other people put ideas in his head during what was already a complicated time. He listened to that one twice, not because it upset him, because he wanted to note carefully how fast she had moved, less than one full day, from softness to pressure. He wanted to remember the exact shape of it. That evening, he called her back. His voice was even, cooperative. He said he had needed a day to collect himself, and that she was right. There were things they needed to sit down and discuss. He suggested the house, their house, later in the week. She agreed immediately. Relieved, he could hear it. She said she was glad he was being reasonable about this. He said he was trying to be. He ended the call and set the phone on the table. Celestine was watching him from across the table. She hadn't said anything through the whole conversation. She had just sat there with her mug, steady and patient, the way she sat in courtrooms when she was waiting for something she already knew was coming. "She thinks this is already over," Darius said. Celestine said nothing. She reached over and refilled his coffee. He pulled up to the house at 2 in the afternoon. He sat in the car for a moment before getting out. Not because he was hesitating, he just wanted to look at it first. The front porch he had leveled himself, the light fixture above the door he had wired from scratch, the walkway he had relaid brick by brick one summer when Yvette said it was uneven. She had been right about that. He had fixed it without complaint. He got out and went inside. Yvette had texted that she'd leave the door unlocked. She was running an errand, would be back by 2:30. He could wait inside. He took that for what it was, an invitation to be in his own house as a guest, and accepted it without comment. He moved through the rooms slowly. The living room had new furniture, a sectional sofa in a deep charcoal gray, wide and low, the kind that cost more than a month of his old salary. A brass floor lamp in the corner he had never seen before. A glass coffee table with a geometric base sitting on a rug that looked imported. The room had been redesigned entirely, not updated, replaced. Like the previous version had been cleared out and written over. He stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment. Then he moved on. The kitchen was mostly the same. She had added a small herb garden on the windowsill, 4 little clay pots in a row. Basil, rosemary, 2 others he didn't recognize. He looked at those for a moment longer than he expected to. He went down the hall to the master bathroom. 2 toothbrushes, side by side, in the holder on the counter. Hers was the same brand she had always used. White handle, blue bristles. The second one was black. A man's razor sat beside the sink. A bottle of cologne on the edge of the shelf, cap off, like someone had used it that morning and left in a hurry. Darius looked at it all. He did not touch anything. He turned off the light and walked back to the kitchen and sat down at the table. He waited. Yvette came in at 2:20. She was dressed well, not overdressed, but intentional. The kind of effort that said she had thought about this meeting as a meeting. She set her bag on the counter and sat down across from him. She looked at him with an expression that was warm and careful at the same time. The way a person looks when they have practiced looking like they feel something they don't quite feel. "I'm glad you came," she said. He nodded once. She had a folder. She opened it and walked him through everything she had prepared. Her voice was clear and organized, each point arriving in order. She wanted the house. She had done the research. She knew what his share of the current equity came to, and she intended to buy him out using proceeds from the business. She had already retained a family attorney, a woman she described as experienced and fair. She said she didn't want this to become a fight. She said that she believed if they were both reasonable, they could resolve everything between them without things getting ugly. She mentioned the pregnancy toward the end, almost as a footnote. "The father is someone I was seeing," she said. "I'm not going to pretend that was okay, but I'm also not going to pretend the last year was easy for me." She paused. "Let that land. I'm planning to co-parent. I hope eventually you can find some peace with all of it. I really do." She didn't name Brandon. Darius could see, in the way she shaped her words, that she believed the name was still hers to hold, a piece of information she hadn't surrendered. She thought it was a card. He let her finish completely. He did not interrupt once. When she was done, he folded his hands on the table and said, "I'll need to review all of this with my attorney before I agree to anything." Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise, but a slight adjustment, like she had expected a different first move from him. "Of course," she said. "That's fair." She paused a beat. "I just want you to understand that fighting this will only cost you money you don't have right now, Darius. I'm trying to make this easy." He looked at her. He did not look away, and he did not look angry. He just looked at her the way he looked at a job site, before he decided where to begin. Then he stood. He picked up the folder she had slid across to him. "I appreciate you putting this together," he said. "I'll be in touch through Walter." She watched him walk to the door. He stepped outside into the cold afternoon air and got in his car. He pulled away from the curb and dialed Walter. "She thinks she's already won," Darius said. "Had a whole folder. Laid it out like a business meeting. She name Holt?" "No." Still holding that. Walter was quiet for a second. "She doesn't know we know about the refinancing." "Keep it that way." "That's what I figured," Darius said. He drove. In his rearview mirror, the lights were on inside the house, warm and gold through the front window. He looked away. Walter called 2 days later, just after 7 in the morning. Darius was at Celestine's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the forensic accountant's preliminary report, a dense 2-page summary that Walter had forwarded the night before. He had read it twice already. He picked up on the second ring. "I found someone," Walter said. "Name is Priya Mehta. She's listed as a partner in Holt's development company. Has been for about 3 years. Darius set down his coffee. "What do we know about her?" "Enough to think she's worth talking to. She built her own reputation before Holt. Independent work, clean record. The way the partnership is structured, she brought clients and credibility. He brought capital and connections." Walter paused. "I made a discreet inquiry through a colleague. She agreed to meet." "When?" "Today, 11 o'clock. Coffee shop on DeKalb." She picked the place. Darius looked out the kitchen window. The morning was gray and still. "Okay," he said. "Darius." Walter's voice shifted slightly, careful, measured. "I don't know what she has, but she agreed to meet without much hesitation, which means something." "I hear you," Darius said. He finished his coffee. He got dressed. He drove to DeKalb. The coffee shop was small and warm, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. Priya Mehta was already there when he arrived. A small woman in a dark coat, sitting at a corner table with both hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. She had the posture of someone who had decided to do something before she fully talked herself into it. Darius introduced himself and shook her hand and sat down. He did not rush anything. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I almost didn't," she said. She was direct. He appreciated that. He ordered a coffee from the server, and then he told her who he was. Not the whole story, not all at once, just the shape of it. Master electrician, union foreman, wrongfully convicted 6 months ago on a fabricated equipment theft charge. Conviction vacated. Came home to find his wife 3 months pregnant by someone who was not him, and then found out that same wife had refinanced his house and moved $60,000 of his equity somewhere it didn't belong. He told her he was trying to understand how far the entanglement went between his wife and her business partner. He told her he was not there to create problems for her. He told her he just needed the full picture before he could figure out what to do with it. He said all of it plainly. No pressure in his voice, no performance, just the facts, laid out the way he would read a blueprint. Start to finish, nothing left out. Priya listened to every word. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Holt brought Yvette's LLC into the company structure about 6 months ago. He said it was for event coordination on project launches, promotional events, client dinners, that kind of thing. But, Darius said, but the ownership stake he gave her had nothing to do with that function." She turned her mug slowly between her palms. She received a meaningful equity position, not a contractor arrangement, not a service agreement, an actual stake in the company. I raised it with Brandon, and he told me it was structured that way for tax purposes. She paused. That was not a satisfying answer. Did you push back? I did. Once, clearly. He dismissed it. Something hardened slightly in her expression. I started paying closer attention after that. Darius nodded. He waited. Priya looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at him. There's something else, she said. I've been sitting with it for a while, and I didn't know what to do with it until your attorney called. She said it carefully, like she was making sure of the words before she released them. A few months ago, I was reviewing a document chain from one of Brandon's older projects. Vendor correspondence, reference letters, that kind of thing. There was a character reference in there that Brandon had written. She stopped. The name on the reference was a subcontractor, a man named Dale Pruitt. The name landed in Darius's chest like something dropped from a height. Dale Pruitt, the man who had testified against him, the man whose account of seeing Darius loading copper wire into an unmarked truck had been believed, had been enough, had been the weight that tipped a jury that should never have been tipped. Darius was very still. He did not move his hands. He did not change his expression. But something in his mind began moving the way it moved on a job site when a panel diagram didn't match the wall, tracing the line back, carefully, to where it had diverged from what it was supposed to be. Brandon Holt had written a character reference for Dale Pruitt. Holt knew Pruitt. That connection existed. Documented, signed, filed away in a folder that Priya Mehta had opened by accident. Holt knew the man who put Darius in prison, and while Darius was in prison, Holt had moved into his house. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" Priya looked at him for a long moment. She was not a woman who made decisions carelessly. He could see that. She was thinking through what it meant, what it would cost her, what it would mean if she didn't. Then she said, "Yes." They found a notary 2 blocks away, inside a UPS store with fluorescent lights and a laminate counter. The notary was a heavy-set man in his 50s, who did not ask questions and did not look up from his stamp more than necessary. Priya wrote the statement herself, in clear and specific language. The document chain, the character reference, Brandon Holt's name beside Dale Pruitt's, the date she had seen it, her position at the company and her access to the files. She wrote it the way a person writes something they intend to stand behind. She signed it. The notary stamped it. Darius folded the document once along the center, then once more. He slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. "Thank you," he said. He meant it without decoration. Priya nodded once. She pulled her coat back on. Darius walked out to his car. Darius got back to Celestine's house a little after 1 in the afternoon. He didn't say much when he came in. He set his jacket carefully over the back of a chair, the side with the inside pocket, and asked Celestine if he could use her kitchen table. She looked at him once, read something in his face, and said, I'll make more coffee. He went to his car and brought in the folder Walter had couriered over that morning. He combined it with everything already in the house: Celestine's composition notebook, the business registration printout, the photographs, and the preliminary forensic summary. Then he spread it all across the table. Every document, every page, edge to edge. He stood over it the way he stood over a set of blueprints on a job site, not looking at any single piece, but looking at all of it together, feeling for where the lines connected. His phone buzzed. Walter. "The full forensic report came in an hour ago," Walter said. "I've been through it. Tell me." The $60,000 moved from the refinancing disbursement directly into Yvette's LLC operating account. From there it transferred out in 2 installments, 10 days apart, into an operating fund account belonging to Brandon Holt Developments. Walter's voice was measured and flat, the way it got when the facts were bad enough that adding any tone to them would be unnecessary. Specifically into the Birmingham project account, the one that's hemorrhaging money. Darius looked at the forensic summary on the table. He had read the preliminary version twice already, but hearing it spoken out loud made it land differently. She had taken the equity from the house he had rewired with his own hands, the house he had bought and gutted and rebuilt, room by room, over 2 years of weekends. She had taken that money and walked it straight into her lover's failing deal. Used his walls, his wiring, his foundation, used all of it as collateral to prop up a man who was bleeding money and didn't want anyone to see it. Because the funds moved through the LLC, Walter continued, and the LLC is co-owned by both Yvette and Holt, Priya has independent standing to file against Holt for misuse of company funds. She doesn't have to wait for our case. She can move on her own. "I'll call her," Darius said. "I already sent her the report summary. Her attorney will handle it from here." Darius exhaled slowly through his nose. "What else?" "I got off the phone with Marcus an hour ago." Marcus Webb, the family law attorney Walter had brought in specifically for the divorce side of things. Sharp, methodical, the kind of man who read statutes the way other people read novels. "He wants you to know that when paternity gets established formally in the divorce proceedings, the child support order attaches to the biological father automatically. That order is not dischargeable. It doesn't care about liens, collapsed projects, or cash flow problems. It follows the man." Darius was quiet for a moment. "Month after month, for 18 years, Walter said. Darius looked at Brandon Holt's name on the business registration printout. He thought about a man who had spent his life believing money was the same thing as protection. He thought about what it felt like to be followed by something that could not be bought off, negotiated with, or avoided. "All right," Darius said. He thanked Walter and ended the call. Celestine set a fresh cup beside him and stood at the counter, watching him without crowding him. That was one of the things about her. She had learned, over years and over courtrooms, when to speak and when to simply be present. Darius looked at the table. He saw the full shape of it now. Every piece, every connection, every line running from one document to the next. He thought about sequencing. On a complex job site, the order of operations mattered as much as the work itself. You didn't pull wire before the conduit was run. You didn't energize a panel before the grounding was confirmed. Every step depended on the one before it. And if you moved too fast, if you let impatience override the sequence, you created problems that cost twice as much to fix as they would have to prevent. The same principle applied here. Hold the fraud evidence. Don't let Yvette know how much he had until the moment it could not be walked back from. Let her believe the divorce was stalling because he was avoidant, overwhelmed, not quite sure how to navigate a legal system that had already chewed him up once. Let Brandon Holt believe he was insulated, that the electrician whose wife he had absorbed into his life like an asset acquisition was out of moves. Let them both stay comfortable. Let them stay unprepared. He picked up his phone. He called Yvette. His voice was even, a little tired. He told her he had been thinking about what she said, that he didn't want this to drag out in court, that it would cost them both more than it was worth. He said he thought one sit-down meeting, with attorneys present, out of court, might be the cleanest way through it. She agreed quickly, almost too quickly. He could hear the satisfaction she was trying to keep out of her voice, and mostly failing. He ended the call. He looked up Brandon Holt's office number. That call was shorter. A receptionist first, then Holt himself, coming on with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who assumes every call is someone wanting something from him. Darius introduced himself. There was a half-second of silence on the other end, brief enough that someone not paying attention would have missed it. Darius explained the same thing he had told Yvette. One meeting, out of court. He wanted to resolve things cleanly and move on with his life. Holt agreed. His voice was smooth again by the time he said it. Cooperative, vaguely magnanimous, the way powerful men sound when they believe they are doing someone a favor. Darius thanked him and hung up. Celestine was watching him from across the kitchen. "You ready?" she asked. He looked at the table. Every document in its place. Every line accounted for. "Almost," he said, "but close enough." Darius arrived 40 minutes early. He liked it that way. On any job site, the foreman who arrived last was already behind. You got there first, so you could read the space before anyone else had a chance to shape it. Walter's law office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. Clean lines, neutral colors, the kind of place designed to feel serious without feeling hostile. The conference room had a long rectangular table, 8 chairs, and a window that looked out over the city. Darius set his folder on the table in front of his seat. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at the door. He waited. Walter arrived 20 minutes later, followed by Sandra Okafor, the civil fraud litigator he had brought in 3 weeks ago. She was compact and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a leather portfolio she set down without ceremony. She and Darius shook hands. They had spoken twice by phone. There was not much left to say. Walter sat up on Darius's left. Sandra took the seat beside Walter. They arranged their documents. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the building's ventilation system. At 11 o'clock exactly, the door opened. They came in together. That was the first statement. Arriving as a unit, unhidden. The relationship no longer something that required management. Brandon Holt came through the door first. He was tall, well-dressed, wearing a dark sport coat over an open collar. His watch caught the light when he pulled out a chair. He moved like a man who was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered, and who had not yet encountered enough rooms where that wasn't true. His attorney, a senior partner from a civil firm across town, someone Darius did not recognize, came in beside him, relaxed, professional, carrying his own portfolio. Yvette came in last. She was dressed carefully. Her pregnancy was more visible now, and she had dressed in a way that acknowledged it without drawing attention to it. Her face was composed. She glanced at Darius once when she sat down, a quick professional assessment, and then looked toward Walter as if Darius were simply another person in the room. She had done that well. He gave her that. Brandon's attorney made a brief introduction. Walter responded in kind, introducing Sandra. Everyone settled. No one commented on the fact that Darius had not spoken yet. Brandon looked at the folders on the table, and then looked at Darius with the comfortable expression of a man who had already decided what kind of person he was dealing with. Walter opened the meeting. "Thank you all for coming," he said. Before any discussion of divorce settlement terms, there are several preliminary legal matters that require acknowledgement by all parties. We'll go through them in order. Brandon's attorney nodded pleasantly. Yvette's attorney, a woman named Croft, who had represented her from the beginning, had her pen ready. "First matter," Walter said. He opened the folder in front of him and began to lay documents on the table with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had done this many times and understood that the slower you moved, the harder it was to dismiss what you were placing down. The loan instrument, the disbursement records, the original power of attorney, and beside it, a one-page summary that outlined its explicit scope. Routine household expenses, bill payment, nothing more. While Mr. Cole was incarcerated, Walter said, addressing himself to Yvette's attorney rather than to Yvette, a refinancing transaction was executed against the marital home using this power of attorney. The transaction extracted $60,000 in home equity. He let that number sit in the air for a moment before continuing. The scope of this power of attorney did not authorize major asset transactions. A civil fraud action has already been filed. This is notification of that filing, not the beginning of a negotiation. He slid a copy across to Attorney Croft. He slid a second copy to Brandon's attorney without looking at Brandon. The room was still. Yvette's expression had not changed, or rather, she had worked to keep it from changing, and that effort was visible to anyone watching closely enough. Darius was watching closely enough. "Second matter," Walter said. Sandra Okafor placed the forensic report on the table. It was bound and tabbed, 22 pages, and she set it down the way people set down things that do not need to be dramatized because the contents do that on their own. Walter walked through it. His voice carried the same even, factual tone throughout. Not cold, not aggressive, simply precise. The transfer from the refinancing disbursement, the LLC operating account, the 2 installments, 10 days apart. The destination, an operating fund account belonging to Brandon Holt Developments, LLC, specifically the Birmingham project. He set a copy in front of Brandon's attorney. Brandon went still, not the comfortable stillness he had brought into the room. This was something different. The stillness of a man who has just realized the room he is in is not the room he thought he was walking into. His attorney was already reading. "Third matter," Walter said. He produced Priya Mehta's notarized written statement, clipped to a summary document prepared by the investigator. He placed it on the table. "We want to be precise about what we are and are not saying in this room," Walter said, his eyes moving briefly to Brandon's attorney. "We are not making criminal allegations here today. What we are doing is disclosing that this documentation exists, that it has been preserved, and that it is included in Mr. Cole's wrongful conviction civil litigation. The question of whether this material warrants referral to the district attorney's office remains, at this time, an open one." Brandon's attorney looked up from the document. For the first time since entering the room, his expression was not relaxed. Yvette turned her head very slightly toward Brandon. He did not look back at her. The silence in the room lasted 4 seconds. Darius counted them. Then Walter said, "We'll allow a few minutes for your attorneys to review." Darius stood when it was time to go. He gathered nothing from the table. He had brought only the one folder, and it had served its purpose. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Sandra's hand, and then Walter's. He walked toward the door. He stopped beside Yvette. He did not touch her. He did not raise his voice. He bent slightly and said it quietly, so only she could hear it. Not as a performance for the room, but because it was meant for her. "You thought I came home broken." A pause. "I came home clear." He straightened. He walked out of the conference room without looking back. In the hallway, the carpet was the same neutral gray as everything else in the building. The elevator was at the end of the corridor, past a row of framed photographs Darius did not look at. Behind him, through the closed conference room door, he could hear the low, urgent sound of Brandon's attorney already on his phone. Walter stood in the doorway of the conference room and watched Darius walk down the hall. Walter called at 8:14 in the morning. Darius was already up. He was sitting at Celestine's kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the light come through the window over the sink. The kind of pale, thin light that February makes, present but not warm yet. He picked up on the second ring. "Yvette's attorney called last night," Walter said. "They're requesting an emergency settlement conference." Darius set his coffee down. "How emergency?" "The kind where you call at 9 in the evening." Walter's voice was dry. "Croft wants to meet by end of week." She used the word resolution 3 times in the message. "What changed?" "The fraud filing hit the public record yesterday afternoon," Walter said. "That's what changed." It did not happen all at once. That was the thing about watching something fall. People always imagined it as a single dramatic moment, a tower coming down clean. But that is not how it works. What actually happens is a sequence. One thing loosens another. That thing pulls on a third. And then, if the original structure was never as solid as it appeared, the whole thing comes apart in pieces, each one following the last with a kind of quiet, merciless logic. The fraud filing was public record now. That meant it was findable. And the people who needed to find it, the people who had lent Brandon Holt money against the Birmingham project, found it within 48 hours. Walter called with the first piece on a Thursday. 2 of Holt's lenders had called their notes, both citing material concerns about undisclosed fund commingling related to the project operating account. The language was formal, careful, the kind of language that meant, "We saw the court filing. We saw where the money came from, and we are done." The Birmingham project, already over budget, already behind schedule, already the thing that had been quietly bleeding Brandon Holt for the better part of a year, could not absorb it. It could not absorb anything else. It stopped. Not loudly. Just stopped. Priya Mehta filed to dissolve the partnership the same week. Walter told Darius about it over the phone, and Darius sat with the information for a moment before responding. Priya had filed her own separate action against Holt for misuse of company funds. The $60,000 that had moved through the jointly owned LLC was, structurally, a company transaction, and she had standing to say so. She took her client relationships with her. She took her professional reputation. She took every account she had personally cultivated. She left Brandon with the liabilities, the pending litigation, and the name. Yvette's event planning business, the LLC that now existed inside that legal wreckage, co-owned and entangled and material to 2 separate fraud actions, did not survive the process. The brand she had spent years building, the client list that Darius's overtime hours had quietly subsidized in the early years while she made calls from their kitchen table, dissolved into the litigation like paper in water. Darius did not feel satisfaction when he heard that part. He felt something closer to a dull, honest grief. The recognition that the thing being destroyed was something that had once been real, something he had believed in, something he had helped carry. He set that feeling down carefully and left it where it was. The divorce proceedings moved faster once the fraud documentation was fully entered into the record. The family court did not need to be convinced. The evidence was documented, forensically traced, and professionally presented. Yvette had accessed marital equity through a power of attorney she had exceeded the authority of, directed those funds to benefit a third party through a business entity she co-owned with that same third party, and done so while her husband was incarcerated for a crime he did not commit. The court awarded Darius the house outright. Restitution was drawn from Yvette's share of the remaining marital assets. The number she walked away with was significantly less than she had arrived at that first kitchen table meeting expecting to negotiate from. She could not buy Darius out using proceeds from what she had taken. That door was not open. Her attorney called Walter to discuss the terms. The conversation was brief. Paternity was established formally as part of the proceedings. Darius's family attorney had ensured it was in the record, not as a punishment aimed at the child, but because the legal record needed to be clean, and clean meant complete. Brandon Holt was confirmed as the father. A child support order was issued and attached to him. Walter explained the mechanics to Darius once, clearly. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about cash flow. It follows the man. Monthly payments. 18 years. Regardless of what the Birmingham project produced, regardless of what the lenders took back, regardless of how the professional reputation rebuilt or didn't, Darius listened to all of it without speaking. The wrongful conviction civil suit settled inside 3 months. The subcontractor's insurance carrier made the decision that carriers make when they look at a jury and calculate the math. They did not want to sit in a courtroom with Priya Mehta's notarized statement in the record. They did not want to explain the character reference connection to 12 people who worked for a living. They settled. Lost wages, suspended union benefits, 6 months of pension contributions, professional reputational damage, documented and quantified. Walter called Darius on a Wednesday afternoon in late April to deliver the final number. Darius was sitting at Celestine's kitchen table. He had a pen in his hand. He wrote the number down on the back of an envelope and looked at it for a moment. Just looked at it. The way you look at something you have been moving toward for a long time and are finally allowed to see up close. The line was quiet for a few seconds. Then Darius said, "All right." He set the pen down. "Let's build something." 14 months later, Darius Cole walked a job site in a hard hat that read Cole Electrical LLC in clean black letters across the front. Not a site he worked. A site he owned. It was a commercial renovation on the east side. A 2-story building getting its guts replaced. New panel, full rewire, updated service entrance. The kind of job that required a foreman who could read the building and the crew at the same time. Darius had both skills. He had always had both skills. The difference now was that the name on the contract was his. He moved through the space the way he always moved through job sites, unhurried, observant, stopping to crouch beside a junction box where one of his guys was working a conduit run through a tight ceiling cavity. "Move that 90 another 3 inches toward the beam," Darius said. "You're going to want clearance when the HVAC sub comes through next week." His electrician, Marcus, 26, 2 years out of his apprenticeship, looked at the space, nodded, and adjusted. No argument. Just the clean adjustment of a young tradesman learning to see what an experienced one already sees. Darius stood and kept walking. He had 3 employees. A 4th was interviewing on Friday. The pipeline was full through the end of the year. It had not been hard to fill it. That was the thing that still surprised him sometimes, though it probably shouldn't. His name had moved through the trades community before he had even finished setting up the business account. Because in a union town, among working people who read the local news and talked to each other at job sites and remembered who had been framed and who had fought back and won, a man's reputation traveled at its own speed. The conviction reversal had been quiet in the newspapers, but loud in the places that mattered. The referrals came in. He answered every call the same way. Straightforward, specific, ready to talk about the work. He gave people accurate timelines and hit them. He returned calls the same day. Small things, consistent things. It turned out that was enough. He had used the wrongful conviction settlement and what remained of his savings. Celestine had not needed to keep the retirement loan extended. He had paid it back in full 4 months after the settlement closed. With interest she refused, and he insisted on. She had taken the check with a look on her face that said she was not going to make a scene about it, which was as close to gracious as Celestine got about money. He was living in the house. He had refinished the floors himself over 3 weekends in the fall, rented the sander, worked in sections, mixed the finish himself. His knees had reminded him, by the 3rd weekend, that he was 38 and not 28. He had ignored them and finished the job. The floors were the color of the original wood now, the way they had looked when he first bought the place and saw what it could be. He knew every board. He had touched every inch of them twice now. There was something about that he did not try to name out loud. It just settled him, the way a solid foundation settles a structure. He had built this place. He had nearly lost it. He had chosen it back. That was the whole story, and it was enough. Walter came for dinner once a month. They sat at the kitchen table and talked about the business, about football, about Walter's youngest grandchild who had recently discovered that screaming was a form of communication. Walter ate whatever Darius cooked and had opinions about the seasoning that he kept mostly to himself. Celestine came on Sundays. She brought food regardless of whether Darius had already cooked, set it on the counter alongside whatever he was making, and then sat at the kitchen table and watched his technique with the focused expression of a woman who had been cooking for 40 years and did not consider that irrelevant. "You're rushing the onions," she told him one Sunday in March. "The onions are fine," he said. "They will be," she said, "when you stop rushing them." He did not argue. He turned the heat down. The kitchen smelled like something good. He was not seeing anyone. He was not in a hurry. That was the clearest way to say it. He had learned, over the past 14 months, the difference between waiting because you were afraid and waiting because you knew your own value well enough not to spend it carelessly. One was a kind of paralysis. The other was a kind of discernment. He knew which one he was practicing now, and he was at peace with the pace of it. Brandon Holt was doing residential flips. Smaller work, slower work. Nothing with his name on a sign out front, the way the Birmingham project was supposed to have his name on a sign. He drove a different car, a practical one, not a statement. He made his child support payment on the 1st of each month because Walter had made the alternative very clear, and Brandon Holt had spent enough time in legal proceedings to know when a man meant what he said. He had a son he saw inconsistently, a boy who was 10 months old now and would not remember the first year of his life, which was perhaps a mercy. Yvette worked event coordination for a mid-size hospitality company downtown. Employed, salaried, not entrepreneurial, not building something with her name on it, not running her own client list, not the version of herself she had spent years moving toward. She was competent at the work. She showed up, she delivered, she went home, she was raising her son. She was carrying the weight of what she had chosen, the way a person carries something they cannot set down, not dramatically, just constantly, present in every ordinary moment of the life she had constructed from the wreckage of the one she had dismantled. She told people, when it came up, that her ex-husband had been difficult to reach during a hard time, that things had been complicated. The people who knew Darius Cole said nothing in response. That silence was its own verdict, and she knew it. Priya Mehta had launched her own development firm 8 months after dissolving the Holt partnership. She had sent Darius a succulent after the settlement closed. No card, just the plant, small and green and deliberate. He kept it on the kitchen windowsill above the sink. It was doing well. He watered it on Thursdays. On an evening in early spring, Darius sat on his back porch with a glass of water and listened to the neighborhood settle into night. Down the block, some kids were still outside, their voices carrying through the cooling air, high and shapeless, the sound of people who had not yet been told to come in. Someone's music drifted through a screen door 2 houses over. A dog barked twice and went quiet. The ordinary, unremarkable sound of people living their lives, stacked up against each other in the comfortable, indifferent way of neighborhoods that have been there a long time. He thought about the man who had walked out of Holman Correctional with a paper bag and a vacated conviction, and the particular silence of a person who does not yet know what comes next. He thought about what that man had expected to come home to, and what he had found instead, and what he had built from it, not in spite of what had been done to him, but with the same hands, the same mind, the same slow, methodical patience that the people who underestimated him had mistaken, right up until the end, for something softer than it was. He sat with that for a while. The spring air was just beginning to soften at the edges, not warm yet, but moving toward it. The kind of night that made a quiet promise about the season coming. He finished his water. He went inside and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.